Snorelock Holmes and the Case of the Aegean Arsonist. Welcome, dear friend. Tonight I find myself drawn into the old question of why Greek fire, even when enemies captured its jars and its bronze tubes, would not burn for anyone but its own keepers. If I can't uncover the small step everyone missed, a modern museum may stage a risky imitation, and the truth of a city's defense could be turned into a spectacle that harms people instead of teaching them. I am Snorelock Holmes, a detective whose best clues arrive in the quiet, when my eyes are closed and the pipe smoke settles. Before we begin, if you like, tell me where you're listening from and which old puzzle you'd like me to wander into next time. I do enjoy reading your notes when the kettle is calm. Chapter 1. The Ring That Smelled of Pine. The night this case began, I had just stepped out of a small lecture hall where the talk was on Mediterranean trade winds. The speaker was warm and kind. He enjoyed applause. I enjoyed the part where he sketched a map and drew a faint arrow to show how a long, slow wind could carry a ship home without fuss. I prefer things that carry themselves steadily. Outside, the street was damp from a light rain. A tram bell rang. A boy ran past with a folded newspaper against his head. I took the long way home for the sake of the puddles and the sound of my shoes on the stones. In my study, a wooden crate sat near the hearth like a well-behaved guest. A museum seal was set into wax. The handwriting on the cover had the kind of confidence that comes from archivists who do not misplace things. It said, Chirosophon, circa 9th century. A chirosophon is a handheld siphon, a small bronze sprayer used on land, not the big deck-mounted ones for ships. That's all anyone really needs to know. I set my hat on the peg and my hand on the top of the crate, feeling the wood cool and dry under my palm. I was in the mood to sit, not to pry. I lit my lamp, filled the kettle, and placed it near the coals. When the faint hiss began, I let my shoulders sink in an old chair that knows the shape of them. I reached for my pipe out of habit. I do not rush toward mysteries. I let them saunter over and introduce themselves. The introduction came as a knock. It was soft, as if the knocker didn't want to make a case of it. I opened the door to a courier in a cap, rain caught in the brim. He had a small parcel wrapped in brown paper and string. "From the museum again, sir," he said. "They said it shook loose inside the big one." I thanked him and gave him a coin for the trouble. He made the coin disappear as if it had always belonged to his fingers and trotted away. The small parcel felt dense for its size. On my desk, I slipped the string with a pocket knife and folded back the paper. Inside lay a slender bronze ring, slightly oval, about as wide as 2 fingers across. It was not jewelry. It was a piece of something larger. The surface showed a dull, honest brown, with tiny ridges inside the circle that looked like the threads of a screw, though they were not threaded in the usual sense. When I lifted it, my fingers came away with the faintest trace of oil, and the ring itself smelled like pine resin and something sharper, like the memory of vinegar. Under the ring lay a letter, folded with a precise crease. I recognized the handwriting from the box. "Dear Mr. Holmes," it began, "I hope this finds you in good health and even better curiosity. We are preparing a weekend program on Greek fire. I know the topic has a reputation for romance and danger. My aim is a safe demonstration, perhaps a smokeless display of how the siphons might have worked without flames. I found your notes on controlled risks and public history in the Journal of Quiet Investigations, and I thought of you. Our conservators uncovered the enclosed ring in the chirosophon crate. It looks like an insert. Could you advise me on whether it belongs in the nozzle? If we proceed, I want to be careful. Yours sincerely, Dr. Eleni Papadakis, curator." The letter was firm and thoughtful. The ring sat on the envelope like a weight on a promise. I turned it in my hands. There were shallow scrape marks on the outer edge, as if a blade or a tool had pried it out of a tight seat. If it had been that tight, then the seat was probably inside metal, and the fit had mattered. I shifted the big crate near the light and eased the lid up with my knife, mindful not to break the waxed thread that attached the label. The packing inside was tidy, shavings that smelled like clean wood, linen wrappings, and a tag pinned to a cloth bundle. Nozzle. I lifted the bundle onto the table and unrolled it. The nozzle was bronze, heavy, with a gentle flare at one end and a narrowed throat at the other. The throat had a clean inner lip, and at the inner edge I saw fresh, bright scrape marks where something had once sat and had been levered out. I held the ring near the throat of the nozzle. It hovered there like a key near a lock. The size looked right, but I didn't press it in. I am a guest at a museum's table, even in my own study. I set ring and nozzle side by side on a velvet pad I keep for delicate things. The ring's smell of pine and vinegar rose like a hint rather than a shout. Vinegar is a simple thing, common in kitchens as well as workshops. It cleans flux and pulls old odors out of metal. The scent meant attention had been paid to this piece. Someone had cleaned it, or someone had regularly rinsed it. I read the letter again and checked the reverse. A postscript. When we gently warmed a sample jar from the crate, resinous and dark, it became thicker and would not take a flame, even when we brought a taper close. We did not persist. It seemed sensible to stop. It was sensible. If you don't know which step you're missing, stopping can be the bravest one. Greek fire, in case we've not met it together, was a Byzantine weapon, a sticky, petroleum-based mixture used mostly at sea to defend their city. It burned on water. Water could not smother it. Sand, vinegar, or old urine could. The people who kept it working guarded their methods like the city's gate. Enemies sometimes captured the siphons and jars, even the pumps, and yet their attempts to use them fizzled and still had no fire. Then what was missing? The kettle gave a little sigh to say it had boiled. I poured water into the pot, set a spoon across the lid, and let the steam find its own path out. I took the ring and knocked it gently with a fingernail. The sound was clear, but not high, like a small bell pressed with a thumb. It had weight, and the ridges inside caught the light. My old set of calipers clicked softly as I opened and closed them around it. Just under 2 inches across in the clear, the inner ridges shallow and regular, as if meant to swirl a flow passing over them. I touched the ridges with the tip of a pencil and felt their even little steps. "I wonder," I said, and I do often say it aloud when no one is there to frown. If it sits in the throat, and if the inner ridges warm or swirl the liquid as it passes, then perhaps this ring is the difference between a stream that will light and one that refuses. It was a thought, not an answer. On the nozzle, scratched into the outer housing, there were marks where a shield had been bolted. Near those marks, the bronze was dark with old heat. Beyond the dark ring lay a clean lip, the seat of the insert. The fit mattered because at the throat, things happen quickly. A stream narrows, speeds, changes character. If you want something to change just so, you make a narrow place for it to pass. That's true for water, air, and all the rest. I wrote a quick card to the lecturer to thank him for the map and the arrow, then set my pen aside with the nib wiped clean. Outside, a light wind found the rain and pushed it into a soft tapping on the window. The tapping made a line between the world and the room. It is a line I enjoy. I sat back, let my shoulders settle deeper into the chair, and set the ring in my palm to warm. There was a second thought tucked under the first. The scent of vinegar on the ring was not from a single cleaning. It had a lived-in quality, like a tool that knows a particular sink. Vinegar is an ordinary neutralizer for strong smells and a mild acid for rinsing flux after solder. If the ring smelled like that, perhaps the ring had its own ritual. Rinse, dry, wear, replace. The idea of wearing it occurred to me because it felt like a thing you would not want to lose. You would keep it close when not in use, perhaps around the neck, like a small gear you trust. I leaned forward and put a sheet of paper next to the ring. I sketched the nozzle mouth, the inner seat, and the ring half placed, and I wrote 2 plain questions. If this ring sits inside, what happens without it? And if enemies took siphons and jars, why did their fires fail? I underlined why only once. There is no need to bruise a question. I lifted the lid of the big crate again and found a short inventory that accompanied it, written in that careful museum hand. Nozzle, 1. Tank, disassembled. Pump assembly, partial. Valves, 2. Jars, 2, sealed. Linen wadding, frag. Tool, bronze, small ring, loose. It made me smile that the ring had been counted, but as tool. Tools are sometimes the quietest secrets in a shop. The pipe ember glowed a steady cherry, and I watched it dim and revive with each breath like a lighthouse on a slow, round shore. My eyelids grew heavy. I set the pipe in the little rest and the ring on its pad, and I let the quiet in the room wrap itself around the few things that mattered. The ring, the nozzle, the letter, and the simple human wish that a museum's visitors be safe and told the truth about a brave and complicated city. Chapter 2. A letter, a nozzle, and a question. I wrote back to Dr. Papadakis that I had received her parcel safely. I told her the ring did look like an insert for the throat of the nozzle, and I was glad she had not forced anything into place. I added 1 line she would feel in her bones. If we do not know the step we're missing, we will not guess it near a flame. It is easy to say no with fear. It is better to say no with a lever. The right plan can lift the weight of an event. I did not yet post the letter. I left it on the desk, signed but unsealed, a placeholder for a firmer mind in the morning. With the crate open and the nozzle on the velvet, I allowed myself a slow circuit of the room, the walk I take when a case has unfolded just enough to be held. The books on the shelf seemed to hold their breath, not out of drama, but because paper has a way of listening. On the wall, an old map of the Bosporus showed the city like a thumb pressed against a strait. I traced the waterway with a finger, north to the Black Sea, south to the Marmara. If a city sits there, it lives by the sea, and its weapons learn to speak the water's language. Greek fire has gathered many myths because it is easier to be frightened by a thing than to learn how it works. The fair and simple truth is that it was a craft. It used thick, sticky oil drawn from the earth and mixed with pine resin so it would cling. It might have had sulfur. It might not have needed it. What mattered more than the ingredient list were the steps. Warm it, keep it moving, pressurize it, and send it out through a nozzle in a stream. On the other end of the stream, you need ignition under control, not a loose flame near a bronze tank. That last part is where I have seen the world's understanding fall apart. People think of torches and sparks, but that is dancing with a barrel. In the papers I had studied years ago, there was a note about enemies capturing siphons in the early 800s. When the Bulgarians were bold, they took jars and tubes and even a pump, and the sources say they tried to use what they had. The result was nothing. Cold liquid, arguments, abandonment. The fact makes sense of another. The Byzantines kept their city. If the secret had been easily copied, the city's history would be different. I wanted to see the missing step, not in an article, but in a shop. The good thing about my condition, if that is what it is that sleep is more than rest. When the case is ready, The dream invites me to stand where the work was once done and be small in the room while the people do their ordinary, important craft. I do not chase. I wait for the little tug behind the eyes. Before I let the tug take me, I tidied the desk a little further. I placed the ring in a shallow dish lined with velvet so it would not roll. I set the nozzle beside it, angled so the throat and its bright scrapes were in view. I laid the letter open, and under it, a clean page with the 2 questions and a small third. What is the work someone does without naming it? Because every apprentice simply learns it. Those are the steps that vanish in time. When people stop wearing the gesture, generations later, no one writes it down. My pipe was near embers, not flame. Its smell was low and warm, a little woody, with a note of something sweet that I can only ever describe as time itself. The kettle had cooled. The house was quiet enough to hear the rain become a mist, then drift away entirely. I placed the kyrosiphon crate back from the hearth, so the wood would not dry or warp, and slipped a folded towel under one end to keep it level. I rubbed the bronze ring with a soft cloth and held it close. The metal kept the heat of my hand. The faint vinegar scent came up again, and I thought, vinegar is in the list of things they used to smother this fire in battle. How tidy if the same ordinary liquid also tended the tool that made the fire work. The world often rhymes that way. After a moment, I set the ring down and wrote one more note to myself. Vinegar may do 2 jobs: calm the fire and clean the coil. Coil? I had written the word before my mind had committed to it. But it fit, and I circled it once. I took a small spoon from my desk drawer. I keep it to hold powder for a different sort of experiment, but tonight it belonged to the case. I held the spoon above the lamp's chimney to warm it, and then rested the ring against the spoon's bowl. The bronze warmed. When I lifted it again, the smell of pine and vinegar met me more clearly. The vinegar note rose as if it lived in the grooves. Heat releases smells trapped in tiny spaces. That is just chemistry and nothing to be excited about, but it can feel like memory becoming audible. There is a small notebook in my pocket wherever I am. I took it out and drafted the roughest sketch of a handheld nozzle, a tank on a sling, and a simple pump with handles. I drew a person's hands on the pump and another person bracing the hose. A third hand appeared in the sketch, placing something at the mouth of the nozzle. Too many hands, I said, and I smiled. But sometimes there really are 3 pairs in a moment like that. One to pressurize, one to aim, one to set the last piece. The lid of my tobacco tin clicked shut under my thumb. It is a small sound I have heard in all my homes. I knocked out the ash in the tray and refilled the bowl lightly, not for burning through the night, just for the last embers of thought. I leaned back until I felt the chair welcome the weight of me. The room had a softness at the edges, the way an old photograph lets the light feather into shadows. I let myself run through the simple answers first. Why would enemies fail with jars and nozzles? Because they were cowards? No, cowards do not take apart machines. Because the jars were empty? No, sources say they were heavy and thick with liquid. Because the nozzles were broken? Some were bent, but many were intact. Because the Byzantines lied? Possible in any age, but the failure is mentioned by witnesses who had no reason to flatter the city. Because a single removable part, a small one, never travelled with captured gear. That felt more like the world as it is. You remove what matters and wear it close. I did not climb the ladder of those thoughts so much as lie under it and listen to the air move between the rungs. My breath slowed in that way it does when my mind has finished the day's inventory. Chest lifting and falling, shoulders unlocking a notch, hands heavy, the ring in the dish, the nozzle at the edge of the lamplight, the letter with its careful lines, the rain gone and no sound replacing it. I felt the tug then, soft and familiar, at the back of my eyes. There is no ceremony to it. I do not count or chant or ask permission of anyone. I simply sit very still, and it happens as sleep happens to all of us when we find the right angle between tired and held. The lamplight thinned, the room cooled, or it did not. I could not tell. The smoke from my pipe rose in an even line, then wavered, and in that wavering, the study became a different room, then a different air, and then I stood somewhere I had been many times, though never on the same evening. Chapter 3. Toward the harbour of bells. Stone under my boots. The cool weight of a coastal dusk, the smell of pitch, salt and human work. I was on a quay, and to my left lay a black slip of water curling into a harbour that broke the city into curves and jetties like a hand with its fingers splayed. Bronze bells tapped lightly together from a ship at rest against the pier. The bells are not the bells of churches. They are small and are hung to ropes as reminders, a soft signal in the night for the watch on deck. The air had that particular flavour of coal, brazier and sea, a dry, wet mix that sounds like a contradiction and yet makes immediate sense when you breathe it. Torches steadied the edges of the path, set into iron brackets, and their flames were short and quiet in a wind that did not hurry. To my right stood a low-roofed building, long and plain, with a wide door open to the harbour. Inside the door, I could see the maps on the wall like long, narrow flags, and below them racks for tools. Bronze shone in small spots here and there where the day's hands had left it clean before night. A man walked past me, carrying a bucket with a coil of hose draped over one arm. He nodded without surprise. He wore a short beard and a cap tucked low because the wind likes to take things. Beyond him, two figures heaved at a hand pump fixed to a frame. The pump was not working any substance a man would want on his skin. They were testing it with seawater. The water came out of the hose in a steady stream and ran off the edge of the quay into the dark. When they stopped, a third figure snuffed the test torch by clapping a metal lid over it with a quiet chime. Workmen, not soldiers. I have always liked the sound of work when it does not try to impress anyone. On the wall of the low-roofed building hung a shield that was more a slab of copper than a shield, curved and heavy, with darkened spots where heat had changed the metal. I stepped inside and ran my fingers near, but not on the metal. The air near it was cool now, but the memory of heat lived in its colour, a dull old plum. Under the shield sat a block upon which a nozzle had been clamped earlier. The clamp's teeth were still splayed with the same pattern I had seen in my study's bronze. 3 small bites, a triangle. This place, then, was exactly where I needed to be. The Imperial Harbour Workshop, where the siphons lived, and where the handpieces, when there were such things, were crafted, fitted and kept. From the open door, I had a clean view of the water and the dark shapes of hulls. Dromons, the long ships of the city, rested with their masts bare and their lines tidy. A dromon has a practical grace. It is pinned together by the knowledge of people who do not like surprises at sea. Near the bow of one, I saw the empty swivelling mount for a larger nozzle and hose, its pivot well greased, its handle smoothed by years. Further down the quay were stacked sealed jars, their tops waxed and cloth-tied, each jar marked with a small seal I did not know, like a loop with a stroke through it. On the far end of the bench stood a clay bowl and a horn spoon. Beside them was a narrow-necked bottle with a stopper wrapped in linen. Something about the shape of the bottle made me think of vinegar. I listened for language. The voices from the doorway did not arrive as a lesson, but as a low set of words that joined meaning to tone. Greek, yes, and the accents you would expect here. Harbour Greek. where people come from many directions and borrow one another's vowels. The night watch called the hour in the simple way of any city, not by number but by duty. First watch, lanterns down, wind at north. There was the clap of a door closed for the night at the far end of the street and the slide of a wooden bar in its place. A young person, slight and quick, came through the door with a bundle of cloth pressed to a chest. The bundle smelled faintly of resin. The person set it on a bench with care and unwrapped it to reveal a nozzle not unlike the one in my study, but larger, with the same narrowed throat. In the light at the inner edge of the throat, I saw the lip where an insert might sit. The lip had a groove polished brighter than the throat around it. That groove was a footprint, small marks of removal and replacement. I did not lean in too close. I have learned that my welcome in a place like this depends on the respect of my posture as much as my words. From somewhere over my shoulder, a brazier crackled as a piece of charcoal settled and took more air. The warmth touched the back of my hands and made the smell of the room deepen from metal and rope to pine and a trace of oil. I noticed a wooden rack beside the brazier with holes bored into it, each hole just large enough to hold a small ring upright. Most of the holes were empty. One or two had small bronze circles standing in them, catching the firelight like coins stood on edge. I did not reach out, but merely looked at them and let the idea of them firm up. Inserts, possibly more than one shape, depending on the result desired. It also occurred to me that the rack resembled a place where someone would temporarily keep something that most of the time stayed elsewhere, on a person perhaps, where it could not be taken with the rest of the gear. A sailor's laugh rose and fell outside as someone told a story with a sweep of an arm. It is good that laughter survives in places where serious work is done. On the back wall, a narrow window framed the harbour's skin of water, which shivered with the reflection of a torch. I could sense, without anyone telling me, that the city behind me was safely in the care of its night. People stirring pots, latching shutters, plunging hands into basins, laying out tomorrow's bread. The workshop was not a place of secrets for their own sake. It was a place where jobs are done in the right order, because if they are not, men and women will be hurt. A figure in a dark tunic paused near me, weighing whether I was a nuisance. He nodded finally, as if deciding I was a kind of broom that leaned quietly against a wall and did not fall over. He went on with his task. I appreciate that sort of acceptance. I moved a little closer to the bench where the young person had unwrapped the nozzle. The throat's lip had 3 tiny notches equally spaced. The notches were not ornamental. They were sins and virtues of real work, where a tool had been levered in a hurry, perhaps during a drill, or where gloves had slipped and metal had kissed metal. The lip was clean otherwise, and I could see in my mind's ordinary eye the ring from my study seating there. The size seemed right. The smell, pine and a clean tang, permeated the cloth the nozzle had been wrapped in. The smell had the same shape as the one in my room. You cannot see a scent, but it can match all the same. On a low table near the door stood a clay jar with a wooden lid, a ladle resting across it. When someone lifted the lid to dip the ladle, a pale ribbon of something viscous rose and fell like honey that has not been warmed. The ladler let it slip back into the jar with a soft sound, the kind of sound that makes a person patient without knowing why. They replaced the lid and tied the cloth down again with a neat knot. No flames were anywhere near that jar. Everyone here understood the shape of safety. They did not speak of it because they did not need to. It was the floor they stood on. I felt the calm weight of having arrived where the answer would be seen, not guessed. I did not yet know the rhyme that would later matter, or the pellet that would light the stream, or any of the proper names of the people around me. Those would come. For now, I knew this. I was in the right room, at the right harbour, in the right century, with the right smell in the air and the right groove in the metal. I knew, too, what task I had brought with me from the study, to watch for the step that was too small to be listed, but large enough to decide whether a city kept its flame under command or surrendered it to fear and noise. The bells on the ship chimed gently with the push and pull of the water, and the sound settled into my chest. In my experience, that is how a good case starts to resolve even before the solving. The world around it becomes regular and calm, and the senses know where they are. I stood by the bench, let my breath match the harbour's little sway, and made a short private ledger of what I had so far. A bronze ring with ridges, smelling of pine and vinegar, a nozzle with a bright inner seat, a curator with a careful mind, and a dangerous invitation on her calendar. A city that had learned to keep its fire asleep until called. It was enough for a beginning. Soon enough, someone would speak to me. A foreman would ask a question and learn that I am happiest holding a wrench if he needs one, and even happier holding my tongue. An apprentice would hum without thinking and let a number fall, but that was for the next part of the night. For now, I stood in the doorway and watched a brazier's glow paint the underside of a nozzle, and I let the smallest things matter. The sound of a ladle, the quiet scrape of a tool set back in its rack, the sea muttering to itself against the stone. I had followed the ring to where it belonged, and the city so far was content to be watched. I will tell you the rest as it unfolded. The people, the steps, the missing little word that held it all together. But first, I will stand here another moment and feel the belly of the harbour breathing. If you've drifted a bit while I spoke, here is a gentle sum of where we are. A museum sent me a bronze ring and a plea for safe counsel. The ring smelled of pine and vinegar and looked like a throat insert. A nozzle bore fresh marks where such a ring would sit. I settled into sleep and found myself at the Imperial Harbour Workshop of Constantinople, where the tools and the air match what we must learn. The next thing we need is not a spark, it is a step. Chapter 4. Brass, brine, and a blank groove. The harbour lay like a dark sleeve around the ships, stitched with little lights. Ropes creaked. A gull gave a single sleepy note and tucked its head. I moved along the quay until I reached a low doorway where warm air breathed out over the water. Inside, the workshop made its own weather. Coal braziers held orange hearts. Iron tools gave off a quiet ticking as they cooled. A pair of bellows sighed now and then, simple lungs keeping everything alive. The place smelled of salt, pine, and something sharp, like vinegar left uncorked. A man glanced up, then down again to his work, with a small nod that served as greeting. He was broad and steady, with a soot mark along one cheek and a bronze disc on a cord at his throat. His hands were bare, but he worked so close to the heat that I could see a glaze of sweat shining along his forearms. He said, without ceremony, "Keep to the left if you don't want a blister." "I can keep to the left," I said in a plain tone. "I'm here to watch the preparations, if that does not burden you. I have steady hands if you need them." He considered me for a moment, then lifted his chin toward a bench. "The name's Theodoros. If you watch, you hand things when I ask. No questions during pumping. You may ask when the fire sleeps." "Fair," I said. The word was simple and true. A girl about 17 stepped around a beam with the quick care of someone who has already burned an elbow once this month and does not plan to do it again. She had ink on the edge of her thumb. She carried a wooden ladle and a metal pin. "He says watch," she told me quietly. "He means be ready." "And you are?" I asked. "Lysandra," she said. "Apprentice today, journeyman before winter, if my lines are straight." Her mouth twitched at the thought. She wore a small pouch at her belt that tapped lightly against her hip when she walked, almost like a second heartbeat. The pouch had a faint chemical smell, a little sour, a little sharp. Theodoros pulled a bronze cylinder from a case. It was polished where hands had held it and browned where heat had kissed it. A set of leather straps hung from its sides, and at one end was a flared nozzle with an inner lip. On that lip, I saw a narrow groove. It caught light like a whisper of silver. The groove was empty. I kept my breath even and let my eyes do the talking. The groove was not an accident. Metal does not wear itself into clean geometry without help. My mind went to the small ring that had warmed in my hand back in my study, the one that smelled of pine and vinegar. I could see that ring fitting into this groove. It would seat once, then twist, ridges meeting ridges, not unlike closing a small jar. Theodoros lifted the nozzle and turned it toward the brazier, warming it in the safe circle of heat, not too close. "We warm the throat," he said. "We never roast it." He looked at me just long enough to be sure I understood. I nodded. At another bench, Lysandra poured a thick amber liquid from a clay jar into a larger bronze kettle set high above a small coal bed. The liquid moved like slow syrup. When the air touched it, I smelled resin from pines, the kind you might smell if you had split wood in autumn and left the sap to find its own path. She stirred with the wooden ladle, slow and steady, never scrubbing the bottom, just circling the middle as if tracing the ring of a coin. The bellows breathed. The workshop settled around the rhythm. I made myself useful and carried a bucket of seawater where Theodoros pointed. We tested a hand pump with the seawater, checking the leather seals. He ran a finger along a strap. "Leather likes brine," he said. "Just a taste. Too much and it cracks. Too little and it drinks the oil." It was simple maintenance, but it felt like part of a devotion. I leaned, on the edge of casual, toward the nozzle again, looking at that empty groove. I could see faint scrape marks on its inner metal, like the marks on the museum piece I had inspected. These marks were fresher, more purposeful. An object had been seated here, then removed and seated again so often that it had left its short history in a ring of gentle scratches. "It seems to me," I said in a conversational tone between breaths, "that something is meant to live there." I did not touch it. I did not need to. Theodoros glanced at the groove and then at me. He did not answer. He warmed the throat, then warmed it again, and left it be. The apprentice returned and dipped a strip of linen into a bowl of liquid that smelled like vinegar, wrung it out, and wiped the inner lip of the nozzle. The sharp scent rose, brief and clean. "We rinse," she said. "So yesterday's breath does not sour today's." "Vinegar?" I asked. My tone was friendly, not prying. She nodded. "Vinegar is honest," she said, with the confidence of a rule stated in a family kitchen. "It takes away what doesn't belong." Theodoros watched us both. I watched his throat where the bronze amulet lay on its cord. The disc did not swing. It sat steady against his chest, dull and unadorned. My eyes traced its edge. It was too thick to be a simple disc, and when he turned, the light caught a hint of ridging along its rim. "I will ask later," I told myself, an inward promise. It seemed to me I had already seen the key, but keys are only useful when the door is ready to open. We moved through small tasks. The resin mix grew looser as it warmed. The pump breathed. I kept pace. The workshop did not hurry, but it did not idle either. Everything here had its time. When the kettle whispered, Theodoros looked to Lysandra and said, "Tell it." She set the ladle aside, wiped her hands, and sang under her breath as she checked each part in order. It was not a song for a stage. It was a working tune with numbers like steps on a ladder. "1," she murmured, tapping the kettle. "Stir the resin. 2, prime the pump. 3, warm the kettle. 4, Ready the shield. 5. Fit the hose. She moved to the nozzle and paused before the groove, her lips pressing together for a heartbeat. Then, 7. Mind the wind. 8. Guard the tank. 9. Keep the sand. 10. Close and count again. She skipped 6. She did it smoothly, like a dancer who knows the floorboard that squeaks. Theodoros glanced my way with the smallest of nods. I nodded back as if he had said, "There it is." We worked by that quiet rhythm until the sky outside turned from plum to ink. The labor warmed my arms and loosened my shoulders. It felt good to be inside a process that made sense line by line, even if I could feel one line hiding. After a time, Theodoros set the nozzle aside, far from the brazier, and leaned on the bench. "Now," he said, "you may ask. The fire sleeps." I wanted to ask many things at once, but I chose the smallest question first. "In your count," I said to Lysandra, "you jumped over 6. Where did it go?" She looked down as if the number itself lay on the floor. "We wear 6, she said softly. Her hand went to her own neck, but her fingers found only skin. She had no amulet. Theodoros touched the bronze disc at his throat and made a tiny private motion that could mean later. He looked at me, and though his eyes were tired, they were kind. "You ask plain," he said. "That is good. Plain questions are safe questions. If you ask crooked, the answers tend to spill." I gave a slight smile and let it fade. The smell of vinegar hung on the air like a folded letter left open. I breathed in and let my breath out slowly. So far, I knew this much, and I spoke it inwardly to steady my mind. The nozzle had an empty groove meant for something that came and went. The apprentice's count hid a step, the workshop rinsed with vinegar, and the amulet at the firemaster's throat was more than jewelry. Chapter 5. The Song That Skipped 6. To rest a little, we sat on a low beam near the lamplight, close enough to feel the heat on our shins, far enough to trust our sleeves. The brazier ticked as a coal shifted. The sea outside answered with a small slosh against stone. The world felt closer at night, like a book held open on your lap. Lysandra, emboldened by the pause, grinned at me. "You hum when you count," she said. "Do I?" I had not noticed. I listened to myself for a moment and heard the truth of it. A faint hum under my breath, keeping a simple pace like footsteps in a hallway. She picked up her tune again, this time a little louder, a little more playful, as if sharing a secret with a friendly cat. 1. Stir the resin. 2. Prime the pump. 3. Warm the kettle. 4. Ready the shield. 5. Fit the hose. She lifted her eyebrows, daring me to say 6. I did not. "The song," I said, "has a gap, but the gap has a purpose. It keeps a step from casual ears." Theodoros took a slow drink from a clay mug. "Casual ears hear what they want," he said. "They want stories that jump from spark to flame. They do not want coils and rinses and leather seals." He set down the mug with a cautious thud. "So they forget what matters." I nodded. "It occurs to me," I said, "that forgetting can be a guard as well as a mistake." Lysandra's eyes flicked to the amulet again. She was not a child. She was learning to carry caution and curiosity in the same pocket. "My mother says 6 is for the throat," she said. "My aunt says 6 is for the hand. The master says 6 is for the neck. They all mean the same thing, I think." "What do you think 6 does?" I asked her, keeping my voice even, inviting her mind forward. She looked at the nozzle where it rested, then at the vinegar bowl, then at the amulet. 6 makes the stream behave, she said, as if the words were stepping stones. Without 6, it spits. Theodoros's gaze held steady, but I saw his mouth tighten very slightly at the word spits. He had seen what a bad stream could do. He had seen it lurch or split, hit a shield, arc back. and push men into fear they would not admit. I waited. The waiting was part of my work. When silence had spread just enough to make an opening, I spoke. In another time, I said, letting the dream's truth rest softly in my voice. I held a bronze ring that smelled of pine and vinegar. Its inside edge was ridged. When I turned it in my hand, it felt like a throat that remembered how to sing. Theodoros turned his head slightly. "You speak like a man who has lifted our coil," he said. His tone was not angry. It was careful. "I have lifted a coil like it," I said. "I think it belonged to a nozzle like yours. I think someone took it out and forgot how to say that they had taken it. So the groove went empty and the song went quiet at 6. He leaned forward and took the amulet in his fingers. The cord went slack, then tense, then slack again. Slowly, he slid the bronze from the cord and placed it on the bench between us. It was not a flat disc after all. It was a ring with a spiral ridge on its inner wall, like the inside of a shell made sensible. The outer rim was thick enough to fit snugly in the nozzle's lip. The inner ridges would force whatever passed through to swirl and scrape along hot metal. The thing would heat a stream by touch and give the liquid a twist. He said, "This is 6. Lysandra leaned over it and breathed a little quick breath. "I've only cleaned it," she said. "I haven't placed it." There was pride and wishfulness in that line. Theodoros lifted a small oil lamp and tilted the flame close to the coil without touching it. "We wear it," he said, "because it goes missing if it sleeps with the nozzle. A coil looks like a coin to men who count coins. They think bronze is bronze. They do not see the ridges for what they are, so we take it with us when we leave the bench." I glanced toward the doorway. In the night beyond, an officer's lantern drifted by on the quay like a second moon riding low in the water. The city had its own gentle constellations. "The smell," I said, "is vinegar and pine." Theodoros nodded. "We rinse with vinegar and a little resin solution," he said. "We keep the coil clean. Oil that isn't ours makes smoke that isn't ours." He sounded as if he trusted the simple, honest work of rinsing as much as any more dramatic gesture. I dared a single touch. The coil retained a hint of warmth from its time near the brazier earlier. I could feel the faint ridges gear against my fingertip, even with the lightest pressure. It seemed to me that when the thick mix passed through, those ridges would scrape it thin along the inner turns, adding heat the way a hand that rubs quickly warms itself. "Without the coil," I said, "your stream would be a tongue unwilling to speak. With it, a rough voice becomes shaped." It was one image, and then I added its plain truth. The coil would make the stream both hotter and more focused. Lysandra tilted her head. "Why skip it in the song then?" she asked earnestly. "Why not sing it out and be done?" Theodoros answered in the simple way of a man who had repeated this to himself so many times that the words fit like worn boots. "Because the water carries voices," he said. "Because boys from other docks come and go. Because the coil goes with a neck, not a crate. Songs leak, necks hold." We fell quiet. The braziers breathed. To my left, a scrap of linen sat on the bench where Lysandra had set it down after her last rinse. A faint ring of darker wetness marked where it had touched the coil. I picked up the linen and pressed it lightly between my fingers. The vinegar smell rose again, clean and sharp. I folded the linen, a simple reflex born of wanting tidy evidence, and slipped it into my pocket. It would remind me later of this rule. "By now," I said softly to myself, "I know 3 things. The groove in the nozzle waits for a coil that's worn on the master's neck. The song hides 6, and vinegar keeps the throat honest. Saying it out loud anchored it better than thinking it alone." Lysandra smiled, as if the air had gotten easier to breathe. "I like how you put things in threes," she said. "It feels finished, even when it's not." "We're not finished," Theodoros said, not unkindly. "We have not lit the stream. We have only taught it to behave." He set the coil back on its cord, but did not lift it over his head. He left it on the bench, where we could look at it without feeling we were stealing a glance. We got up then and moved back through our checks, each of us falling into the comfort of small, repeatable movements. The counting song hummed under our breath, skipping 6 in the open and holding it close in our hands. Chapter 6. The Coiled Amulet and the Quiet Trust. The bell on the harbour wall marked the change of watch with 4 slow notes, soft as stones in a pocket. In the quieter hour that followed, Theodoros asked me to carry the nozzle to a second bench where the light was softer and the risk of stray flame was even lower. He had the care of a librarian handling a dangerous book. "You spoke of a captured crate," he said as we settled there. "Tell me what you saw." "In another study," I said. A nozzle sat heavy in a crate, marked with a name I recognized. Inside the throat, I saw fresh scrape marks where a piece had been removed. The piece was not in the crate, but a small parcel had shaken loose. Inside was a bronze ring, a little oval from a hard life, ridged inside, smelling of pine and vinegar. "The ring," he said, half to himself. His fingers rested by the coil on the bench. "The smell is not in the metal," he added. "It is in what the metal remembers." I nodded. "Memory is often a smell," I said lightly. "It returned me here." He glanced at Lysandra. "Fetch the pellets," he said. She moved to a little locked box near the back wall. The lock was simple but clean. From within, she brought a small wooden tray with wool lining and several tiny linen-wrapped bundles, each tied with a knot. On the corner of each packet, someone had drawn a dot with ink. All the dots faced the same way, toward the same edge of the tray, like soldiers who understood the dignity of standing in a row. "What are they?" I asked, although I already suspected. "Starter pellets," said Lysandra softly, pride trimming the edge of her voice. "They wake the stream." "On command," Theodoros added. "Not before." He watched her as a good teacher watches someone do something delicate for the first time. It is its own love language. Lysandra lifted one pellet with tongs. It was no bigger than the nail of my little finger. The linen was clean. She dipped its base into a shallow saucer of liquid that I could not smell from where I stood, and then, with careful fingers, she fitted it into a tiny notch at the lip where the coil would sit. The pellet looked like a seed waiting for a growing season that would last a single breath. "Only at the last moment," she recited, almost whispering. "Pellets sleep until the coil warms." "What happens," I asked, "if someone sets a torch to the stream and expects it to catch?" Theodoros made a small motion with his hand, fingers fluttering like a bird startled off a rail. "It's all spit and no flame," he said. "Or the mix burns backward and smokes. We don't do that." I pictured the enemy docks across the water, men with stolen tubes and hungry eyes, holding a flame too close and then swearing at the cold insult of nothing happening. It was anger born out of ignorance, which is one of the most predictable angers in any century. We did not fire anything yet. We only made the readiness. Theodoros set the coil into the groove, turning it a fraction until the ridges met home. He warmed the throat gently. Lysandra kept the pump tested with seawater and the kettle at a patient heat, stirring at intervals that had nothing to do with the clock and everything to do with the feel of resistance under her hand. 3 nights, Theodoros said out of the blue, as if continuing a conversation I had not heard. "If you stir it, and if you keep it warm enough to move, We call it living, but it is only ready. If you leave it be, it dies. Dead fire, Lysandra added. It looks the same in the jar, but it isn't. It doesn't take. And if you heat it too much? I asked. Theodoros's mouth went flat. Then it curdles, he said, and it clogs the throat. Then you curse the day you forgot to watch the heat. He spoke like a man who had unclogged a throat with a wire and a prayer. I let that settle. So the rules grew in number, but not in confusion. Rule the first, the coil shapes and heats the stream. Rule the second, the pellet ignites at the lip, not in the tank. Rule the third, the mix lives if stirred and warmed, dies if neglected, curdles if heated like soup on a foolish fire. These were not secrets meant to shock. They were careful, domestic truths applied to a dangerous task. For a time, we simply breathed with the workshop. There was a comfort in listening to things that had nothing to do with being clever. The wind probed the shutters and gave up. The bellows answered the brazier with its quiet breath. My eyelids felt heavy, but not in a way that interfered with attention. It was the heaviness that comes when watching a kettle steam in a quiet kitchen, knowing it will be ready when it is ready. By now, I thought, laying the facts in a gentle row, I know 4 things. The coil lives on a neck and seats in the throat. The rhyme hides 6 on purpose. A pellet starts the stream at the lip, and the mix is a living thing in the sense that it requires tending. Saying the word living felt a little like telling a plant that the window would be opened soon. It was not mystical, it was practical. Theodoros broke the quiet with a small, almost apologetic cough. Until this hour, he said, you have not asked who told me to skip the number in the song. I assumed it came from above, I said. From an officer with a mind for rules. He grimaced faintly. It came from below, he said. From my father's father, who worked leather and could not stop boys from singing. So he made a hole in the song and wore the coil on his chain. The hole is the lock. The chain is the key. His eyes softened at the mention of the man. We are a line of men who clean metal and tell it to behave. That is a good line to be in, I said, and I meant it. We did not light the thing. That would come only when the harbour officer signalled a safe test. Instead, we closed the coil box, locked the pellet tray, and recorded in a small book what we had done and what we had not done. Lysandra wrote in neat squares of ink. 5. Fit the hose, she read as she wrote. 7. Mind the wind. She lifted her pen. The line between seemed to glow with blankness. She did not write it, but I saw her knuckle press against the page where 6 would sit. We rested our hands on the bench and let our breath find the same slow pace as the lamp flame. It occurred to me that the simplest way to guard a dangerous step is not to make it louder, but to make it personal. Chapter 7. Pellets that Wake, and a lamplight recap. Morning in the harbour did not arrive with a shout. It crept in with a quieter draft, and the pale sound of ropes unbending. I stepped to the doorway and looked across the grey water. Masts marked the sky like tall script. A baker's cart went by, the warm smell of bread curling in with the sea air. I have found that a city's safety often smells like bread. Theodoros joined me, rubbing his shoulder as a man does when he has a long friendship with that joint. We'll test with water first, he said. We always do. The tank breathes differently with resin, but the pump does not know the difference. He handed me the pump handle, and we took 5 steady strokes. The nozzle hummed a little as the water passed through it and fell in a clean stream onto the stones beyond the threshold. He watched the stream, the way a farmer watches rain. I listen for a tone, he said. It tells me how the coil seats. He tapped his ear with a knuckle. It sounds right today. Lysandra brought the pellet tray and set it near, but not close. She had tied a new knot on her pouch and checked it twice. Pellets only at the last moment, she repeated, glancing at Theodoros without quite looking at him. He gave her a single nod that would carry her through a week. "May I see one more closely?" I asked. "Without touching." She held the tray so I could look. Under the linen, something faintly granular gave the wraps their shape. "What's inside?" I asked. "If you can say." She licked her lip and thought. "I am allowed to say that it wakes easily when fed hot breath," she said, "and that water does not put it out at once." She had memorized the permitted line and stuck to it. It struck me how different this was from later powders that were all smoke and thunder. This was a domestic trick answered by metal and oil, not an explosion. It was a courteous hand extended to a flame and then withdrawn. The officer of the harbour made his rounds then, boots tapping in a pattern that said he did not need to hurry because the watch had been attentive. He stepped into the workshop and looked around with a surveyor's eye. He was not here to judge. He was here to confirm habits. "The siphons?" he asked. "Sound," said Theodoros. "The coil?" "On hand," said Theodoros, touching the bench where it lay. "Pellets?" "In the tray," said Lysandra, with the smallest touch of pride. The officer's gaze softened for a moment. He tapped his seal ring against the door lintel, a light, ritual knock. "Across the horn," he said. "There's smoke where there should be none. Keep your coil with you when you step out. Orders from the Admiral." "We already do," Theodoros said. The officer moved on. His boots left tiny bookmarks of wet salt along the stones. We went back to our rhythm. When the time came to test the ignition path, not with the resin mix, but with a thin broth of oil and water that would behave without making a scene, Theodoros warmed the throat, Lysandra fitted a pellet at the lip, and I took the pump handle in a steady grip. "On my call," Theodoros said, "not before." He held a long iron rod near the throat, its far end set in the brazier to hold heat. He was not giving the pellet flame. He was giving it warmth, no more than a breath. "Now," he said. I pumped once. The little pellet kissed the hot stream and flared briefly, a small controlled star meeting a river. The flare ran forward a hand's width and then died against the stone, as it was meant to do in a safe test. No shouting, no surprise, just a clear sign that this was the path the flame would take when the mix ran. Lysandra exhaled, shoulders dropping, and smiled at her own discipline. "It wakes," she said softly, "then it sleeps." Theodoros straightened the coil with a small twist and looked to me. "You see the path," he said. "I do," I said. "And I see why men with stolen jars and no coil would fail. The pellet needed its place, the coil needed its seat, the throat needed its honest heat. Without one, the others could not make up the difference." We cleaned the lip again with a vinegar cloth. The smell rose and went. The day widened by a small margin. The workshop felt like a chest that had loosened its laces. After a time, we sat again at the lamplight bench and let our minds return to stillness. I made a quick drawing of the coil in my small notebook, a simple ring with inner ridges and a notch marked at the lip. I drew a line for the pellet seat. I wrote, plain as a grocery list, "Coil warm stream, pellet wake stream, vinegar keeps throat clean, stir daily, do not overheat." By now, I told myself, I know 5 things. The coil is the missing part. The 6th step in the song is to seat it. The pellet is set at the lip and woken by warmth. The mix lives by stirring and moderate heat, and a plain rinse keeps yesterday from confusing today. If anyone had asked me to swear to a mystery, I would have laughed. There was no mystery left in those lines, only care. Lysandra peered at my drawing. "You draw like a man who wants someone else to be able to finish the sketch," she said. I do, I admitted. I don't like lonely diagrams. She grinned, then tucked a lock of hair behind her ear and looked over her shoulder as if to be sure no one needed her. The workshop hummed. No one did. We were not allowed a long rest. Breath had found its steady cadence when a shadow crossed the doorway like a cloud, and a man in a short cloak with salt on his boots stepped in with a rolled paper. Chapter 8. The Messenger and the Stilled Jars. The messenger, an officer of the harbour by the seal on his ring and the briskness of his tongue, nodded to Theodoros and handed over the roll. "Orders and news," he said, "and not the good sort." He stood in the doorway and did not remove his cloak, the posture of someone who knows his news is a passing chill. Theodoros took the roll, broke the wax, and read with his mouth in a straight line. He then passed it to me without comment. It surprised me, the trust in that motion, but I took it and read. The script was careful and direct. It said that a coastal depot to the west had been raided in the night. Several hand siphons and 2 larger nozzles had been taken. 1 bronze tank, empty, had also been carried off. A small number of jars containing prepared fire had gone missing. There had been no deaths, only bruises and anger. The Admiral ordered all coils to be worn by masters at all times off the dock and pellets to be stored separately in locked trays. The line about the jars was underlined. Do not count the jars as fire, count them as parts. I handed the roll back. They took tubes and tanks, Theodoros said, echoing the worst of it, but not our necks. His hand went unconsciously to the coil on the bench as he said it. And the jars. He waved a hand at the notion of jars as if shooing a fly. 3 nights if you stir, dead if left. If they don't know to warm and stir, they've captured cold soup. Cold soup, Lysandra repeated, and it sounded like a safer thought than fire. The officer pinched his lower lip between his fingers and released it. "They'll try anyway," he said. "They'll point the tube at a ship and hold a torch like boys at a festival. They'll shout. It will spit or cough, and then they'll make up a story." "What story?" I asked, curious how rumor shapes itself on a wind. "That the sea's breath killed it," he said dryly. "Or that our saints blessed it to go quiet when stolen." He shook his head. "Men don't like to say they forgot to stir." Theodoros rolled the order and slid it into a crack in the beam where such things were kept for 7 nights and then burned in a small, ordinary fire that was no one's business but the stove's. He looked at Lysandra. "Write the change," he said. She took up the logbook and wrote as he spoke. Coils worn off the dock, pellets apart, jars not counted as fire. She pressed her lips together at that last line and underlined it once. "Not fire," she murmured, copying the adjective. "Not yet, not without breath." I felt the stake slide into place like a lock whose key had finally turned. This was no longer a tidy workshop truth. It was a matter of the city's safe nights and the way rumors would grow across the water. If enemies learned the ritual, not the formula but the steps, they might not copy the thing, but they would get closer to making danger. The officer took a breath that sounded like a sail filling. "Across the Horn," he said, "men are already poking at what they took. If I had to guess, they'll heat it like stew and scorch it. If they do that, they'll foul their own pipes. If they're lucky, they'll foul them before a test and not during." He shrugged, a sad, practical motion. Luck isn't loyal. "Do we light ours?" Lysandra asked, not shy anymore. "To be sure?" Her voice was steady, but I could hear a thread of eagerness. Eagerness is not hunger, it is readiness asking for a yes. "Not on the quay," Theodoros said. "On the water, away from oak and rope. The Admiral will call it if he wants it." He looked at me. You wanted to see the order of things. Now you've seen the churn of the day. We returned to the bench and did work that does not make a page of history, but makes the next hour safe. Wiping the lip, counting pellets, tapping the pump to hear the right tone, checking the brazier for too much coal. The coil lay between us, dull and quiet. It felt like a coin you'd never spend because it remembers the hand that gave it to you. When the messenger had gone and the workshop thinned of people who were not the three of us, I stepped outside to the quay. The stones were warm from the day's stored heat. Water murmured. A dog trotted past with a rope of dried fish in its mouth and the calm of an animal on an errand. By now, I said in a low thought to myself, I know 6 things. The coil is separate and worn on a neck. The 6th step is to seat the coil and set the pellet. The pellet wakes at the lip. Vinegar resets the throat. The mix must be stirred and kept moderately warm, and captured jars left unstirred and cold turn dead. I let the words line up and then released them like counting beads. The air felt a degree lighter. Recapping is a way to calm a mind that likes to add. From the quay, I could see across the golden span of water a cluster of figures on a low jetty within the enemy's reach. They looked like men who had not slept long and who did not intend to stop when wisdom would suggest a nap. Smoke drifted up from their brazier, dark and too busy. Even at this distance, I could tell they were cooking their mix, not warming it. Soon enough, I told myself, I will see what they do wrong. Not with malice, with curiosity and a lack of patience. Both are as old as anybody's name. Chapter 9. Across the water, failure by inches. Late afternoon's light leaned out across the horn, laying a flat, clear path. Theodolos, a junior officer I'd met at the brazier a day earlier, lent me a small spyglass with a strap knotted for a wrist slimmer than mine. "Don't let it go," he said without drama, and I promised I would not. It smelled faintly of oil and cedar where someone had kept it in a box with a scrap of wood. I went up a rise near a cypress and found a place among some wild thyme, my back against a warm stone. From there, I could look across the water without being a figure. The wind stroked the thyme and the scent rose, green and sleepy. I steadied the glass and caught the enemy work in its small circle. They had a brazier too, but it roared instead of breathed. Flame licked the bottom of their tank. A man with an impatient jaw stoked the coals no matter what the others said. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the rhythm of argument. It was the old song of hurry and wait, snapping at each other. One of them held a torch too close to the nozzle. Another waved him off with a slap. The torch holder brought it back again, like a moth that keeps mistaking a window for the moon. They pumped the handle at odd intervals, fast, then slow, then fast again. The stream drooled out, thick and uncommitted. Bad soup. I adjusted the focus and looked at the lip. There was no coil. The throat was a smooth round, a simple pipe. No ridges to scrape heat into the stream, no notch for a pellet, and I saw no linen bundles on a tray. One man did have a pouch tied at his belt, and he patted it often as if it held reassurance, but he never took anything out of it. Perhaps it was a habit, not a tool. They argued more. The torch went away, then returned. Someone pointed to the kettle as if to say more heat, though the mix had already begun to clump. When he lifted the ladle, strings pulled and broke, like cheese stretched beyond sense. He looked surprised, as if soup should behave the same at any temperature. He did not know that in the middle, where it mattered, the bottom was burning. A gust from the water leaned into their faces, and one flung an arm up to shield his beard. Whatever thin flame had tried to begin at the torch's tip gusted out. They jabbed the pump handle harder, but force is not a substitute for form. I lowered the glass and let my eyes rest on the plain view of water for a moment. By now, I thought, the story writes itself. They had jars that had sat unstirred for too long, a tank heated past usefulness, a throat without a coil, no pellet at the lip, and a wind that did not care about their schedule. It was enough to fail without embarrassment, except among them, and they would blame each other rather than their missing steps. When I looked again, the man with the pouch finally took something out. It was a wad of cloth. He thrust it at the nozzle and stepped back, smoking torch in his other hand. The cloth blackened and let off a sullen smoke, then went out and sagged. He yelled at it, as if scolding could relight a chemical truth. The others yelled at him, the rhythm of their bodies sharpened to corners. I drew a small diagram in my notebook of their setup as seen from afar, not to mark their failure with glee, but to reassure my reasoning. Without the coil, the throat offered no heat and no swirl. Without stirring, the mix had settled and clotted. With too much heat, what little oil might have behaved now misbehaved, and the pellet, the gentle, smart spark that would meet the stream like a handshake, was nowhere. Behind me, the cypress made a shushing sound in the wind. I nodded. I agreed. It was better to let the world be simple when it could. I stayed long enough to see them give up for the afternoon. They pushed the tank aside, kicked the brazier, and sat with their backs to the water. One of them threw the torch into the sea and yelped when it hissed and spat hot ash back on his boot. His friends laughed. The laugh was relief, not joy. I returned the spyglass to Theodolos, where he sat on a coil of rope, tying and untying a knot so slowly that it felt like breath. "They'll say your saints killed their fire," he said, echoing the messenger's bitter joke. "They'll say something," I said. But it was only the missing coil, the missing pellet, and a heavy hand with heat. I touched my pocket where the vinegar cloth lay folded, and a jar left to sleep too long. He nodded as if I had recited a prayer he only half remembered. "I prefer our work," he said. "It asks you to be kind to the steps." "Kindness to steps is often the same as skill," I said. "People do not think to call it that." I walked back to the workshop in the long amber of evening. Theodoros stood outside, arms crossed, looking not at the water but at the stones of the quay, as if reading what the day had written there. "They failed?" he asked, not needing a story, only a yes. "They failed," I said, "in the ordinary way." He grunted, relief arriving without triumph. "Good," he said. "Let them tell each other tales." He tapped his coil where it hung. "We'll write down what we must and sing what we can." Lysandra, hearing us, came to the door with the logbook tilting under her hand. "Shall I add a line?" she asked. "To the song?" She looked hesitant and hopeful at once, like a student who wants to be allowed to change a rule that has earned its place. "Not to the song," Theodoros said. "To the book. The song is for the hands. The book is for the day when someone forgets the tune." He glanced at me. "Unless you have another notion." "I have only this," I said, feeling the weight of the bronze ring in a pocket that felt like it lived in both times at once. "That one day, when all is quiet and right, you might write a plainer line for 6 where it cannot be sung out loud, so that if the song is lost and the coil is found, your people will still know to seat it, set a pellet, and warm the throat. But I will leave that for the hour when someone calls the count." He looked at me and nodded once, slowly. "Plain words are also a lock," he said, "if they're kept in the right box." The sun slid down. The braziers burned lower. The smells of the workshop softened. The vinegar, the faint pine, the wool of the pellet tray. We cleaned, we counted, we closed. By now, I told myself in the quiet at the door, the pieces are all on the bench. I did not rush them into place. I would do that when the night asked me to. For the moment, It was enough to hold the coil in my palm and feel the ridges press their small truths against my skin. Chapter 10. Night Harbour. Soft Certainty. The harbour bells marked the first night watch with notes that fell one by one into the water and seemed to float there. We did not answer them with noise. We answered by turning down braziers and checking straps. The workshop lived by the kindness of habit. A light fog drew in from the mouth of the sea and made the lanterns wear halos. It was easy to stand and do nothing, easy to let the air soften the edges of thought. I packed the coil into its small box and unpacked it again, as if to prove to myself that it still existed in my hand and not just in the song. Each time I tilted it, the ridges caught the light in a way that reminded me of the tiny ridges on my own fingerprint. I smiled at the idea. It was a small kinship between a human hand and a made thing. Theodoros wrote a few lines in the log. His letters were sturdy, not pretty. The words needed to be read in rain and in a hurry. Pellet stock sufficient, coil sound, nozzles checked, orders posted. He paused, then added a line in the margin. 6, not sung. He looked at the words until they settled into the page, then blotted them. Lysandra put away the vinegar bowl, folding the cloths so the edges met. "I like vinegar," she said with a seriousness that might have sounded funny if you did not live here. "It tells you when it is there. Some things don't. You have to guess. Vinegar speaks." "It does," I said, "in its way." The cloth in my pocket felt like proof. We heard distant talk from men off duty, soft laughter, the rhythm of a dice cup, a low song that had nothing to do with numbers and everything to do with not being on the water for the night. The city rested with one eye open, but it rested all the same. If there is a better sound for a harbour than peace, I have not heard it. I stepped back to the doorway and looked at the line where water met sky. Somewhere beyond the fog, the men who had shouted at their torch were limping home to stew and stories. One would say the Byzantines had charmed their fire, another would say the jars were fake, another would say he had known all along that no flame would come. Their shoulders would lower. They would sleep badly and wake bored and try again in a week, or not at all. That is what failure looks like when it runs out of energy. I went back inside and sat by the lamplight. I rubbed the edge of the coil with my thumb, and then stopped, not wanting to polish it in a way that would lie to future eyes. Theodoros noticed and smiled, almost to himself. "Some men polish a tool until it forgets its purpose," he said. "Some leave it black with yesterday's use. There's a middle, and I like it." "The middle has kept you," I said. "The middle keeps many of us," he answered. In that last active hour before true night, we chose to do nothing more dramatic than count and cover. We counted pellets by quiet twos. We covered the kettle with a cloth that let out breath and kept out dust. We counted pump strokes in air to hear if the seals whispered wrong. They did not. Each small act said, "Not yet, but ready." By now, I thought, inviting sleep to stand near but not step in. The question that brought me here has an answer that is made of steps, not revelations. Enemies failed not because of a curse, not because of an emperor's oath, not because the sea chose sides. They failed because a coil did not sit in a throat, a pellet did not kiss a stream, and a mix was treated like stew instead of a living duty. It was so ordinary that it became beautiful. It meant people could learn it and keep it and pass it down in a song that skipped one number on purpose. Lysandra closed the logbook and patted it once, the way farmers pat saddles when the horse is at ease. "When I take the count," she said, her voice almost lost in the hush, "I'll say each step with the picture in my head, not just the word." "That's how steps stay," I said, "not in the mouth, in the hand." She smiled, not to me so much as to herself, the smile of someone who has found the rung she was reaching for and felt it hold. We banked the braziers. We set the coil box in the same place it always slept. Theodoros looped the amulet back onto its cord and slid it over his head. The coil rested against his chest, a small and dull sun that would never burn him and would save others. I thought of him on a morning 20 years ago, younger, being told by a man who had his own cord, "Wear this home, do not let it leave your skin." I thought of him nodding and not arguing, and of how much of a city's history is held together by small agreements kept in the ordinary night. Outside, the fog thickened with a soft, even patience. The world narrowed to the lamp's circle, and the sound of the sea saying the same thing over and over in a language no one truly knows, but everyone understands. I folded my hands on my knee and let my head tilt a fraction towards sleep. Not yet. Soon. There was one more hour in which the answer would be asked to stand up and be named. And then I could go. For now, the coil lay where it needed to. The pellet tray was counted. The tune in my mind had its gap, and I knew what sat in it. I felt no hurry. The mystery had softened into knowledge, and knowledge, once gentle, does not demand applause. It asks only to be used correctly when the hour comes. I breathed in the vinegar's ghost and the resin's sweet bass note, and thought of the curator in the other time, her letter, her wish to show the public something both true and safe. I would tell her that the living part of the weapon was not in the jar, but in the steps. And I would suggest light and water to carry the story instead of flame and risk. It seemed a small kindness to leave the audience with wonder that did not singe their eyebrows. The bell marked the next watch. Theodoros nodded to me and then to the doorway. A permission, a blessing, or perhaps only a good night. I nodded back. The night, like the sea, did what it always did. It kept its watch. By now, I told myself one last time in the language of steps, I know what I came to know, and I will place it where it belongs. I let the thought sit. I did not move it along. The workshop sighed. The lamp's flame leaned into itself and held. The coil cooled by a breath, and every breath in the room followed it down. Chapter 9. Count the Sixth. The enemy camp's torches threw long lines across the water, and I watched the glow tremble as men argued over a stubborn nozzle. The tank hissed where they had heated it too much. The stream drooled out, thick and dark as treacle, and refused the flame they pressed against it. It occurred to me that their failure was not a single mistake. It was a handful of small misses stacking up in a neat, invisible tower. I turned back toward the Imperial Harbour workshop, following the curve of the stone quay by memory and by the soft clink of rigging. Dusk had lowered into a comfortable blue. The brazier inside the doorway gave a steady, even heat that felt like a hand held a little way from the cheek. Theodoros looked up from the bench where he was trimming a piece of leather that shielded the pump handle. Lysandra at the log table lifted her quill and waited for a sign that I carried trouble with me. I did not. "I've been thinking," I said, setting my palm against the warm rim of the brazier for a slow breath. The air smelled of pine and the sharp ghost of vinegar. About what is present and what is absent. Theodoros's eyebrows rose a notch. "Speak simple and straight, friend. It is late, and I keep apprentices safe by sleeping at least some of the night." "Simple and straight," I agreed. The throat coil, the pellet, the warmth, and the song that hides what it must say. I held up the thin bronze ring I had carried with me, the one that had found me by crate and courier and chance. Its ridged inner edge caught the light, tiny shadows in each groove. This is the coil. I smelled vinegar on it when I first turned it in my fingers. I smell vinegar here. You rinse the coil in vinegar so it is clean and hot ready, yes? Theodoros watched my face, then looked once to Lysandra as if to confirm that the room could hold the words. Yes, he said at last. Vinegar clears the sticky soot. If we only scrape, a film remains. The film cools the throat, and you keep the coil off the nozzle, I continued, around the neck or in the pocket when not in use. So an enemy might seize a tube and even a jar, but he would not seize the coil that makes the stream become what it needs to be at the very lip. Nor would he seize the pellet that waits until the last breath to be placed. Lysandra closed the logbook and hugged it. Her inked knuckles made small prints on the leather. "We wear 6, she whispered, almost proud, almost shy. "You do," I said, "and because you wear it, and because the song leaves a gap, a stranger who overhears everything will still miss the one action that matters. Count the 6th, and the stream remembers fire." Theodoros held out his hand. I placed the coil in it. He weighed it on his palm the way a cook weighs a familiar spoon. Without ceremony, he crossed to a nozzle laid open on the bench and showed me the shallow groove where I had earlier noticed scrape marks. He tilted the coil and slid it in with a tiny, satisfying seat. He touched each ridge with one finger, nodding at how they would swirl and heat the flow. He did not need me to explain. He only needed me to say aloud that the missing thing was the thing they already believed in. "We will not burn tonight," he said, still holding the nozzle, "unless you judge it safe." His voice was steady, not proud, not fearful. "We test with seawater first, then oil, no flame, only warmth until we place the pellet." "That is exactly right," I said. I had no interest in a chase or a show. I wanted clarity more than spectacle. Let us do this slowly and write each step without a riddle. Lysandra slid from her stool and brought the small linen packet marked with a single dot. Her fingers moved with a habit I recognized in careful workers, a check, a pause, and then the act. "Pellets only at the last moment," she murmured, echoing her teacher. "Begin with the count," I said, out loud so I can hear it unbroken. She took a breath. 1. Stir the resin. She stirred the mixture in the bronze tank with a paddle shaped like a flat oar. The sound was a low scrape, thick and steady. 2. Prime the pump. She worked the hand pump with a few slow pulls, enough to feel it take. 3. Warm the kettle. The brazier glowed dull orange under the tank, giving enough heat to soften the mix without a boil. 4. Ready the shield. She set the leather and wood heat shield between the nozzle and their faces. 5. Fit the hose. She checked the seals, tight. She stopped because habit told her to skip, and looked at me. The habit wasn't a fear, it was simply the shape of the song as she had learned it. I nodded toward the nozzle and the coil. Count the 6th. Her shoulders loosened. 6. Seat the coil, set the pellet, warm the throat. She fitted the pellet, a tiny, wrapped, reactive bundle, into the coil's forward lip where the stream would pass. Theodoros held the nozzle above the brazier for a breath, not close enough to lick the flame, just close enough to wake the metal. He turned the nozzle away, out toward the water, through the open door. 7. Mind the wind, she finished, and stepped to the side to feel the night air moving. Tonight it came from the water, a light, helpful breeze that would carry hazard away. We tested the pump with seawater first, the stream firm and clean, the coil seated, the shield in place, no one leaning over the line of fire. Theodoros squeezed the handle. The braided hose flexed. A bright arc of water hissed and broke on the stones. No harm in watching water behave. Then we switched the draw from the tank to the nozzle. Theodoros set his jaw in a neutral line and looked toward the open harbor rather than at the contraption in his hands. It is an old way to keep nerves polite. Look where the work is meant to go, not at the work itself. Slowly, I said. A little first. He squeezed the handle a fraction, enough to send a narrow ribbon through the coil. It met the warmed throat and the waiting pellet at the lip. There was a soft, brief bloom of light, not a roar. The stream lit as if the candle had remembered its wick. A modest, controlled tongue of flame extended into the night, skimming low over the quay, reaching out into the harbour, where it became a floating, thin sheet that soon thinned further. Theodoros released the handle. The sheet wrinkled and died on the water as the last small bit touched the sand at the edge and sputtered out with a few stubborn sparks. We all stood very still in the fading glow, breathing lightly, listening to the slow tick of hot metal cooling. The harbour seemed to hold its breath, then let it go. It was not a spectacle. It was a tool behaving as a tool should. "That is enough," said Theodoros. "We have confirmed the throat's work. No more." He turned to Lysandra. "Write it plain." She opened the logbook, wetted her quill, and wrote in careful lines. 6. Seat coil, set pellet, warm throat. She looked up at me, not for approval, but out of a simple wish to share the relief of something stated clearly. I inclined my head and felt the same relief tugging a corner of my mouth. "Why vinegar?" she asked, filling the pause with a small, honest curiosity. "To clean, and to cool the coil enough not to stick after use," Theodoros said. "And because every shop has vinegar." He tapped the amulet against his chest. "I will no longer hide the number in your song. The song helped you remember. The book will help you teach." I leaned an elbow on the bench and let my eyelids fall for a moment. My mind lined the pieces up like small ships in a calm bay. By now I knew 4 things, and soon 5. The coil sits separate, worn as an amulet. The pellet is placed only at the last breath. The mixture lives if stirred and warmed, and dies if left or burnt. The rhyme had hidden 6, and now it would not. And the vinegar scent on my ring meant I had held their missing piece even before I arrived. The chain was simple. The comfort came from its simplicity. "You've saved us from either shame or waste," Theodoros said, setting the nozzle back on the bench. "Shame if we forgot our own step. Waste if we burned what we did not need to." "Neither appeals to me," I said. "I prefer a clear line in a book." I patted the log. "And a coil where it belongs, which is not on a captured pier." He smiled in his quiet way. "Then let this be so. Coils off the gear when ashore, pellets locked, logs clear, and if anyone asks, the song has 7 lines and all of them are true." He lifted the bronze ring from the nozzle and pressed it back into my palm for a last look. "You carry wisdom like a traveler's token," he said. "Keep this one in your memory. Return it to its box, or to the water." "I will return it to its box," I said. "And to a letter." Lysandra hummed as she sanded the wet ink. 1. Stir the resin. 2. Prime the pump. 3. Warm the kettle. 4. Ready the shield. 5. Fit the hose. 6. Seat the coil. Set the pellet. Warm the throat. 7. Mind the wind. The tune was the same, but the step now had a home, and the step's small honesty seemed to tidy the entire room. Chapter 10. Rings and ripples. We did not wake the harbour a second time. One clear test had been enough for everyone's nerves and the workshop's doors. Theodoros set the nozzle aside on a wooden cradle, and we fell into the small, familiar behaviours that keep a place safe. Caps screwed onto jars, scrap lint swept into the bucket, damp cloth laid over the brazier's lip to quiet its heat. The mood in the room relaxed by inches, not leaps. It reminded me of a ship lowering its sails after coming into harbour. Less noise, more order, nothing showy. A harbour officer in a short cloak came in with the evening orders rolled under his arm. He had salt dried in a ring above his boots and a tidy impatience that can either bruise or heal, depending on the hour. Theodoros broke the seal with his thumb and read the lines with him. Siphons reported lost at Anchialos, the officer recited. 2 hand tubes, maybe 3. No coils mentioned, no pellets mentioned. Inventory incomplete. He glanced at the bench and then at Theodoros's amulet. Your rules? Posted anew, Theodoros said. Coils worn when ashore, pellets stored apart, logs to show the 6th plainly. He did not raise his voice or his chin. He pointed to the fresh ink already drying in the book. The officer read, nodded once, and made a note of his own with a stub of charcoal. I will carry that up the chain, the officer said. Our people remember in times like these. Still, we write it, and we sing it. He paused at the door. A word came back from the north. The raiders tried to light what they stole. It would not catch. Their men call it dead fire. There was no gloating in his tone, only a factual calm. He left as efficiently as he had come, the seal ring on his hand clicking once against the latch. Lysandra returned to trimming the pellet ends to neat size. She did it with the same careful rhythm she used to stir. 3 cuts, a check, a small smile when the shape looked right. Dead fire, she said softly. They will hate that. They will go back to what they know, Theodoros answered. Torches, tar, arrows with rags. We do not wish them surprises. He turned to me, as if I were part of the room's routine now. You said you came because of a crate. Yes, I said. A crate labelled for a small hand siphon. The coil had shaken loose. The letter inside spoke of a demonstration for a public hungry to see what should not be shown in a hall. I ran a thumb over the ridge lines of the bronze ring again. The metal retained a little of its earlier warmth, as if it remembered the brazier's glow. A good person wished to honor your craft and your city, but a spark in the wrong room is still a spark. Write her with care, he said. Tell her what matters without telling her what harms. Tell her that the light of this thing is not its truth. He tapped the nozzle lightly with a knuckle. Its truth is steps and patience. She can show that without flame. I will, I said. I'll sketch a coil and a throat and a pellet as shapes only, with labels that speak of warmth, stirring, and timing. I will suggest water and light, not fuel. Lysandra set down her knife. You draw? Enough for a note, I said. Enough to keep a talk honest. We fell again into a kind of quiet that is particular to workshops at night. Tools slept in their places. Leather cooled on the bench. Even the smell of pine resin, which can be sharp, had softened itself around the edges. Theodoros took the coil once more and showed Lysandra how to slide it into a linen pouch that hung inside his tunic, where it would never brush against the nozzle unless the step demanded it. On your person, he said. In your mind. In your book. He tapped the pouch, then her forehead, then the log. On my person, in my mind, in my book, she repeated. People often remember best when they involve all 3, body,